Hello, I'm David Schofield. So over the last 10 years or so, I've been being focused on this question of how do we function more effectively as a society? And I know there are countless people asking this question, but I've been down a very specific rabbit hole. And what I concluded was that we needed to create small self-sustaining communities. Now, I'm not talking about your kibbutz. I'm not talking about people running to the hills and cutting themselves off from the world at all. We are part of a civilization and we need to be working as part of that civilization. However, there are some things that we're doing very, very badly right now. And I think the only solution is for us to withdraw some of our dependence from the systems of governance and food and education and health and all those things that we are heavily dependent on, and look after ourselves better. Right? We need to be able to maintain our physical resources better. We need to be able to get along with each other better. We need to know what stories to tell to our children so that they can understand the world in a positive way, in a constructive way. But most importantly, we need to take responsibility for ourselves. Now, seeking to figure out how to build these communities, that has had to be the lion's share of my focus. Because if I don't get myself right first, I'm not going to be able to be in part of those communities anyway. I'm just certainly not going to be able to start one. So one really useful frame I found recently was brought forward by a guy called Rudolf Steiner, who was a polymath 100 years or so ago. He was really famed, Swiss guy. He's a Christian as well. He bases a lot of his work on Christianity, but also on Goethe, a German philosopher. So it's worth checking all of those out. And I'd grown up not feeling particularly good about Christianity or religion generally, as most people in our society feel, but I've been coming around to it. Not the way the church teaches it, generally speaking, but there are ways of understanding Christianity, it seems, where it's very, very valuable. So one of the frames that Steiner puts forward, which I find extremely useful for my own personal development, is that there are two devils, essentially, although the Christian world would probably say there's only one most of the time. There are two devils, and these devils sit at opposite ends of a scale. They're extreme forces of two different kinds on the same scale. One, he will not probably be familiar with, is known as Ahriman. He is, if you like, the force of materialism, the force that takes everything apart and tries to break everything up and make everything specify and draws all of the spirituality, the unknown out of things, makes everything as known as possible. That force of materialism is all about encasing, as far as Steiner is concerned, souls in matter. Casing souls in matter. So first of all, you've got to get on board with the idea that there's a soul, which most people, it seems, do not buy these days. And something I had to come around to. I'm still coming around to. But the soul being encased in matter. And in that case, Ahriman has total control over that soul, that essence of each individual. That's the force of materialism. On the other side, we have the force of spiritualism, which is all about unity, bringing things together, not picking them apart, bringing it all into oneness. It's about inspiration. It's where inspiration comes from, where ideas come from, where communication is possible, real communication from an inspired place. And the devil that represents this polarity will be known to you. His name is Lucifer, the fallen angel, the highest of the angels under God's reign. And these two forces are constantly at play in our lives. So the frame goes from Rudolf Steiner. Steiner proposes, aside from the mainstream Christian view that Lucifer is evil and we should stay well away from Lucifer, Steiner's point is that they are unavoidable forces of nature. So we need to learn how to work with them in a way that they do not take control of us. And to some, that might be quite a scary idea. What, you want me to work with the devil? Well, no. You're working with the devil within you because it's there. And if you don't, it's going to be in control of you. And then Lucifer and Ahriman win, essentially. So the way that Steiner proposes that we work with these two devils in a constructive way is to bring a Luciferic impulse into the Ahrimanic. So that is to say, to bring genuine inspiration into things that go on in the material world. So if you are really inspired and interested by material sciences, mathematics, then to let that inspiration drive you to discover new things and to forward those domains of material life. And vice versa. We need to take an Ahrimanic approach to our Luciferic impulses, which is to say, to critically, rationally test the ideas and the inspirations we get. Because the trouble is we can end up too far in delusion and not test our ideas and then disappear off. Lucifer wins in that case. Lucifer wants to take our souls away from the earth entirely and therefore be in control of them. So we have these two opposing forces within us. Being extreme in any way is not good for us, not good for anyone, but those extremes are present nonetheless. So we need to find a way to create that balance. And bringing the impulses into one another balances that out. And that is what Steiner says is living with the Christ. That is what the Christ is. He created a sculpture called the representative of man. And that's what the Christ is supposed to be, this balance point between the polarities of evil that are within each of us and that are playing out in the world everywhere at all times. Very, very useful frame that I found. There's an awful lot of study and discussion I've had around the various polarities in the world, left and right, masculine, feminine, being some of the big ones at the moment. But really, this is further to the core, more archetypal perhaps, of what seems to be happening. We have two extreme forces, energies, devils influencing us at all times. And the only way to survive that onslaught, that influence, is to strike a balance between the two. What happens if we don't do that? The best metaphor I've seen for it is the Matrix. We are both totally off in delusion, living in a virtual reality, which we can see these days already happening with metaverses and addiction to social media and all of the ways that we take ourselves off into worlds that aren't physically real, that we cannot pick up on with our five senses. But at the same time, with the Matrix, being totally encased in matter, being in a pod, being a battery for the delusion. That's where Ahriman and Lucifer work together and win. And if there was ever to be some sort of globalist takeover endgame, that would be it. Not because that's intended by any people on the planet, but because that's where those impulses drive us. And that's what the Matrix was about, I think, warning us that that is a tendency. But that's a long game. We've also had warnings from people like Orwell. The controlling state governs everything we do. It changes language in order to manipulate us. We're seeing that play out through wokeness. But that's really not the end game, not by a long shot. So it's all very, very interesting. So how does this relate to community? Well, we all need to essentially, not following the dictates of the church, because the church doesn't seem to be doing it very well, but to understand what living with the Christ is for ourselves as individuals. And I am just scratching the surface of that. That is a big one. But the implications are that we live with greater personal responsibility and greater responsibility for the world around us also. Ultimately, these are good things, whether you want to believe that there are spiritual forces at play in the world or not. Ultimately, these are very helpful outcomes. Where it gets tricky and why people are put off religion is because of all the dogma and probably the forces of Ahriman and Lucifer playing through those institutions. That's how I see it. These are not places where people are doing serious spiritual work. These are administrative organizations that place ideal pressures upon the people that work within them. And those people are not learned enough, certainly not committed and focused enough to be able to carry that, to understand what they're actually being asked to do, even though the people asking them perhaps don't understand either. And so they lapse and they do awful things to children and whatnot. So the church is not the place to be. That does not write off religion in my mind, though, as much as I've been against it for most of my life. So living with a more spiritual bent to the world, there's a lot of people who are interested in that. But what that means in practice is often floating about the hillside with daisies in your hair, taking a load of hallucinogens, going to festivals and being part of chaos and expecting that's all right. Taking responsibility for ourselves means recognizing that we have devils in us and that we need to take responsibility for them, or they will be in charge. That's the way the world's going now. If people don't start stepping up, taking this stuff seriously, then we're in for a lot of trouble, an awful lot of trouble. So if you're interested in talking about any of the things I've spoken about today anymore, get in touch. Love to hear from you. Put in the comments below.